How about you play something for us? I bet you know Happy Birthday to You. The voice of the famous pianist Claire Beaumont echoed through the grand ballroom of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., eliciting muffled laughter from the musical elite that filled the room. Sarah Mitchell, 19, stood beside the Steinway grand piano, her hands gripping her white cane with a force that turned her knuckles white. Dark glasses covered eyes that hadn't seen for 11 years, since the accident that also took her mother. She had arrived there with her public school music teacher, who had managed to get 2 tickets to the season's most exclusive benefit recital. No one expected a blind black girl to become the center of attention, especially not in this way. Claire adjusted her $8,000 silk dress and smiled at the audience of 200 patrons and music critics. At 46, considered one of the greatest living interpreters of Rachmaninoff, with 3 Grammys and international tours that filled concert halls worldwide, she personified everything the American cultural elite valued: talent, sophistication, and most importantly, belonging to the right club. "Come on, dear," Claire insisted, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm sure our generous donors would love to see how we invest in diversity." The last word came out with a particular weight, as if it were a foreign concept she was experimenting with for the first time. Catherine Wells, the director of the organizing foundation, murmured something about it being inappropriate to her assistant but did not intervene. After all, Claire Beaumont was the star of the night, responsible for raising millions for the institution. Who was she to question the pianist's methods? Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers tightening on the cane. No one there knew she spent 10 hours a day practicing on an out-of-tune upright piano in the basement of a community church. No one knew that at age 8, before the accident, she could already play Mozart sonatas by heart. And more importantly, no one imagined that at that exact moment, while everyone saw her as an embarrassing curiosity, she was memorizing every note of arrogance that hung in the air. "Actually," Sarah said, her calm voice cutting through the murmur of side conversations, "I prefer Liszt." Claire let out a genuine laugh. "Liszt? Seriously?" She exchanged an amused glance with a music critic sitting in the front row. "Which piece could you possibly play, dear?" Claire's smile was about to freeze when Sarah replied with a serenity that only exists in someone carrying a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. "La Campanella. But perhaps it's too technically challenging for this audience to fully appreciate." The silence that followed was so thick one could hear the ticking of the antique clock in the entrance hall. There was something in the way Sarah stood, a quiet confidence in her words, that made some guests realize they were about to witness something far beyond a simple humiliation. Claire felt a genuine sting of irritation. How dare this girl suggest that the audience was not up to par? "Too advanced," she repeated, her voice taking on a sharper tone. "Young lady, you are talking to people who finance orchestras around the world. Perhaps you don't understand where you are." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied. And there was something in her tone, not insolence, but absolute certainty, that made Claire hesitate for a split second. Jennifer Hartman, heiress of a pharmaceutical empire and the foundation's main patron, whispered to her companion, "How audacious. Someone needs to teach this generation about respect." But Sarah remained still, and something about the way she held the cane subtly changed. Her fingers no longer trembled. Instead, they were completely relaxed, like a surgeon's before a delicate operation. "Claire," Dr. Robert Hayes, the Boston Symphony Orchestra's conductor, intervened, "perhaps we should continue with the main program." "No," Claire cut in, now clearly angered by the perceived insubordination. Young Sarah here seemed to question the sophistication of our guests. "I think it's only fair that she demonstrates this musical superiority she's insinuating." Claire walked up to the piano and played the first bars of La Campanella with exaggerated, almost theatrical movements. "See, Sarah, this is a piece that requires not just technique, but emotional maturity. Something that takes decades to develop. Are you sure you want to expose yourself like this?" What Claire didn't know was that Sarah knew every nuance of that performance. More than that, she knew something about Claire Beaumont that no one else in that room knew. Something she had discovered by accident 3 weeks ago and had been guarding like a secret weapon. Sarah approached the piano, carefully leaning her cane against the bench. Her hands found the keys with the precision of someone who had mapped thousands of keyboards in their mind. "One question before I begin," Sarah said, turning slightly to the audience. Her voice was soft but carried a weight that made the entire room pay attention. Has anyone here ever lost everything they loved in a single moment and had to rebuild their soul, note by note? The silence that followed was different. It was no longer social awkwardness, but recognition. Some guests began to realize they were witnessing something much deeper than a simple musical demonstration. Claire felt a chill of apprehension. There was something in Sarah's posture, in the way her hands hovered over the keys, that suggested the night would not follow the humiliating script she had planned. Sarah's teacher, sitting in the fifth row, immediately recognized the tone in the girl's voice. It was the same one she used before solving impossible music theory problems, or when she was about to demonstrate something she had prepared in secret for months. "Sarah," Claire insisted, losing patience completely, "are you going to play or not? Because I can assure you no one here has all night for your existential musings." "Actually," Sarah replied, adjusting her position on the bench with movements that seemed rehearsed 1,000 times, "I'd like to make a small change to the proposal." Claire arched a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "A change?" "Instead of La Campanella," Sarah said, her hands still hovering over the keys, "how about something more revealing? Something that demonstrates the difference between playing notes correctly and truly understanding music." And it was then that Sarah dropped the bomb that would make the entire night crumble in a way Claire could never have predicted. "How about I play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3? The one you supposedly recorded live in Vienna 3 years ago." Sarah paused, a small smile crossing her face. "Except you weren't the one playing in that recording, were you?" The blood drained from Claire's face so fast that she had to lean on the piano. The room exploded in shocked whispers. If you are intrigued by how a 19-year-old blind girl discovered a secret that could destroy the career of one of the world's most famous pianists, and want to know how this confrontation will transform not only Sarah's life but expose truths the musical elite has been hiding for years, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what is about to be revealed will prove that sometimes the people society most underestimates are exactly the ones carrying the most explosive truths. The silence that followed Sarah's accusation was deafening. Claire Beaumont, a woman who had spent over 2 decades building her reputation, turned as pale as marble. That is absurd," she stammered, but her voice betrayed the nervousness she tried to hide. "How dare you make such a ridiculous accusation?" Sarah remained seated at the piano, her hands still on the keys, her expression serene. "It's not an accusation, Ms. Beaumont. It's a fact. And I can prove it." Dr. Hayes rose from the front row. "Young lady, you are making an extremely serious allegation. I hope you have evidence to substantiate it." "I do," Sarah said simply. "But before I reveal it, I would like Ms. Beaumont to play the opening of the third movement. Just the first 32 bars. It should be easy for someone who supposedly recorded the piece live." Claire felt the trap closing. If she refused, she would look guilty. If she accepted and made a mistake, she would confirm suspicions. "I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone here." "Of course not," Sarah agreed. "But your patrons deserve to know the truth about the woman asking for millions in donations, don't you think?" Jennifer Hartman exchanged a worried glance with her husband. They had donated $500,000 to the foundation based on Claire's reputation. "Claire," she said slowly, "perhaps it's best to clarify this now." Claire approached the piano, pushing Sarah off the bench harder than necessary. "I'll play. And when I do, you will apologize publicly for this ridiculous farce." She positioned her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began. The first bars came out technically correct, but something was wrong. A hesitation imperceptible to untrained ears, but obvious to the experienced musicians in the room. Sarah tilted her head, listening with uncanny attention. "Bars 18 to 21, she said softly. "You used alternate fingering. It's not incorrect, just different from the Vienna recording." Claire stopped abruptly. "Musicians adapt fingering all the time." "But you didn't adapt in the recording," Sarah interrupted. "In the recording, those specific bars use a technique developed by a pianist named Vincent Chun. A technique he developed after an injury to his left hand 5 years ago. A technique only he uses." The room fell deadly silent. "Vincent Chun," Sarah continued, her voice still calm but carrying the weight of irrefutable truth, "was your private teacher from 2018 to 2021. He played in that live performance, while you pretended to play on stage." Dr. Hayes sank into his chair, his face expressing mounting horror. "My God. Claire, is this true? Claire looked around the room, seeing a decade and a half of reputation crumbling. How could you know that? Sarah smiled sadly. Because Vincent Chun is my teacher. He has been for 3 years. And 3 weeks ago, during a crisis of conscience brought on by drinking, he told me about the biggest mistake of his life, agreeing to be your ghost pianist in exchange for payment he desperately needed for his daughter's medical treatment. The bomb exploded in the room. Reporters present began writing furiously. Patrons whispered in shock. Catherine Wells covered her mouth with her hand, realizing her career was also ending. You're lying, Claire tried, but her voice was weak now. Vincent would never. He gave me the rehearsal recordings, Sarah said. Recordings where your voice clearly directs his on how to play, because you couldn't execute the piece yourself. He kept them as insurance in case you tried to destroy him later. Claire staggered to the nearest chair. Jennifer Hartman was now standing, her face red with anger. We donated $500,000 based on your reputation. A reputation built on fraud. It wasn't just Vienna, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength now. The Carnegie Hall performance in 2019? Vincent. The Grammy-winning album, recording in 2020? Vincent. You have real talent, Ms. Beaumont, but not at the level you sold to the world. So you hired a ghost. Dr. Hayes rose slowly. Claire, if this is true, and based on your reaction, I believe it is, your career is over. Completely. The Grammy will be revoked. Contracts cancelled. You will be banned from every reputable concert hall. But Sarah wasn't finished yet. There's more. Something Vincent told me that is even worse than the fraud. Claire looked up, her eyes red. What else do you want from me? The truth about why you humiliated me today, Sarah said, turning her blind head in Claire's direction with unnerving precision. You knew who I was when you asked me to play as a joke. Vincent told me he mentioned having an extraordinarily talented blind student. A student he said would one day be greater than you ever were. The air went out of Claire's lungs. He said that. And you couldn't stand it, Sarah continued. You couldn't stand the idea that a blind black girl from a public school could have the genuine talent you had to fake. So you decided to publicly humiliate me before I could threaten your position. The truth hit the room like a tsunami. It wasn't just about fraud. It was about insecurity so profound that Claire had tried to destroy a 19-year-old girl preemptively. Claire began, but the words died. There was no defense. There was no excuse. She looked around the room and saw only disgust reflected back. Ms. Beaumont, Catherine Wells said, her voice trembling, consider your contract with our foundation terminated immediately. And you can expect legal action for fraud. Jennifer Hartman grabbed her phone. I will be contacting my lawyers about recovering donations made under false pretenses. Dr. Hayes shook his head sadly. Claire, we've known each other for 15 years. How could you? But it was Sarah who delivered the final blow. You know what's saddest, Ms. Beaumont? You do have talent. Not at the level of genius you sold, but genuine. If you had been honest about your limitations, you could still have a respectable career. But you preferred a lie. And when you realized that lie was threatened, you tried to destroy an innocent person. Sarah rose from the piano, picked up her cane. Thank you for the opportunity to play today. But I don't think it will be necessary. After all, I just gave a much more important performance, exposing the truth. As Sarah walked toward the exit guided by her teacher, Claire sat amidst the wreckage of a career she had built on a foundation of lies. In 15 minutes, the girl she had tried to humiliate had completely destroyed everything it took her 25 years to build. And the most devastating part? Sarah had done it without playing a single note. Sarah's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, hugged her student as they left the room. Sarah, how did you know the right moment? Sarah smiled sadly. Vincent told me everything 3 weeks ago. But I asked him to wait. I knew Claire would eventually confront me. People built on lies always attack the truth preemptively. I just needed her to give me the stage. But now Vincent will be exposed too. He knows, Sarah interrupted. And he's ready. He wants to clear his conscience. His daughter is cured now. He no longer needs Claire's money. And more importantly, he wants me to have the career I deserve, not one stained by a liar's shadow. What Sarah didn't say was that she had recorded Vincent's complete confession, with his permission. A recording that was now in the hands of 3 different music journalists, scheduled for publication the next morning. Claire Beaumont would wake up tomorrow to find that the scandal was not just local. It would be national. International. Her name would become synonymous with musical fraud. And Sarah? She would wake up to calls from Juilliard, Curtis, and conservatories around the world, all wanting to know more about the blind girl who had exposed one of modern classical music's biggest frauds. 3 weeks before the confrontation at the Kennedy Center, Sarah Mitchell sat in a small rehearsal room in the basement of Georgetown Methodist Church, her fingers gliding over the keys of the out-of-tune upright piano that had been her constant companion for 11 years. Again, Vincent Chin said, his voice laden with a weariness that didn't just come from long hours of teaching. At 52, the Chinese-American pianist who had once filled concert halls now survived by giving private lessons for $50 an hour. The tremolo in bar 47 needs to be lighter. Think of rain, not a storm. Sarah adjusted her technique, and the notes flowed with renewed delicacy. Vincent closed his eyes, listening not just to the music, but to the purest talent he had encountered in a 30-year career. This girl, who had come to him 3 years ago with a cheap piano and fierce determination, had something that couldn't be taught, a truly musical soul. "Perfect," he said when she finished. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "Sarah, can I tell you something? Something that has been eating away at my soul for 4 years." Sarah turned her blind head toward him. "Of course, Mr. Chun." What followed was a 40-minute confession that would change everything. Vincent told about his 8-year-old daughter, diagnosed with leukemia in 2018. About the medical bills that reached $400,000. About how Claire Beaumont had approached him with an indecent proposal, $200,000 to be her ghost pianist in performances where she would pretend to play. "I needed the money," Vincent said, tears streaming down. "My daughter was dying. So I agreed. I played while she pretended on stage, moving her fingers over the disconnected keyboard. The Vienna recording, Carnegie Hall, even the Grammy album. It was all me." Sarah was silent for a long time. "Your daughter? She's cured now. In remission for 2 years." Vincent laughed bitterly. "But the price of saving her was selling my integrity. And worse, it was allowing the fraud to continue while Claire used a false reputation to crush other musicians." Crush. "She's territorial. Vicious with anyone she sees as a threat." Vincent paused. "Especially young talented people. I talked about you 2 months ago, Sarah. About how you are more talented at 19 than she ever was. And I saw fear in her eyes. Fear that the truth about her would be exposed when a real genius appeared. It was then that an idea was born in Sarah's mind. Not revenge. She didn't care about Claire personally. But justice. And more importantly, an opportunity to expose the system that allowed fraud to flourish while genuine talent was suffocated by lack of money and connections. "Mr. Chun," Sarah said calmly, "what if there was a way for you to clear your conscience and simultaneously prevent Claire from destroying other musicians?" "How?" "Let her confront me. You know she will. You planted the seed by mentioning my name. Now she'll want to humiliate me before I can threaten her." Sarah smiled. "And when she does, we'll expose everything." Vincent looked at his student with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Sarah, if we do this, my career also ends. I'll be known as a fraud along with her." "Your career is already over, Mr. Chun. Claire ensured that when she made you her accomplice." Sarah turned to face him directly. "But the difference is you acted out of desperation to save your daughter. She acted out of pure ego. The world will understand the difference." For the next 3 weeks, they meticulously prepared. Vincent provided rehearsal recordings, emails, bank transfers. Sarah memorized every detail, every nuance that would prove their case. Most importantly, Vincent recorded a complete confession on video, explaining exactly what he had done and why. "If we're going to do this," Vincent said, "we do it right. No ambiguity. The complete truth." But there was something Sarah hadn't told Vincent. Something she had discovered on her own that made the situation even more explosive. 2 weeks before the event, Sarah asked a favor of a cousin who worked in technology. "I need you to analyze these recordings of Claire Beaumont. Specifically, I want you to compare her micro-movements in performance videos with the actual movement patterns of pianists. What the cousin discovered was devastating. In live performances, Claire often moved out of sync with the music. Her hands reached positions milliseconds before or after the notes were heard. To the untrained eye, imperceptible. But to computer analysis? Clear proof that she wasn't actually playing. She's been doing this for years, the cousin explained. Since at least 2015. Before hiring Vincent, she used recordings. There are videos where her movements don't match the audio. Sarah kept the information like a nuclear weapon, something to use only if Claire tried to deny everything. On the day of the event, as she prepared, Ms. Rodriguez asked, "Sarah, are you sure about this? Claire Beaumont is powerful. She can destroy you." "She can try," Sarah answered. "But the truth has its own way of protecting itself. Especially when it is thoroughly documented." What no one knew was that Sarah had also contacted 3 specialized classical music journalists, giving them copies of all the evidence, scheduled for publication the next day. Even if something went wrong at the Kennedy Center, the story would come out. Now, days after the confrontation, Sarah sat in the small apartment she shared with her aunt, her phone ringing incessantly. Juilliard had called 3 times. Curtis Institute offered a full scholarship. Even European conservatories were making offers. But the call that truly mattered came from Dr. Hayes. "Sarah, it's Robert Hayes. I'd like to talk about a position at the Boston Symphony. Not as a student, but as an artist in residence. Our youngest program ever." "I appreciate it, Dr. Hayes, but I need to ask something first." Sarah paused. Why did no one question Claire before? Surely other musicians were suspicious. Heavy silence. Then, because she was profitable, she filled holes. She brought in donations. And questioning her meant questioning the system that benefited us too. We were all accomplices by omission. The brutal honesty slightly redeemed him in Sarah's eyes. "So what changed?" You refused to accept the hypocrisy. And by doing so, you forced all of us to confront our own complicities." He took a deep breath. "Sarah, the world of classical music is small and elitist. We need people like you to remind it of what music should truly be." Meanwhile, Claire Beaumont was in the apartment she would soon lose, watching her career collapse in real time. The Grammy was officially revoked. Contracts cancelled. Even worse, a criminal investigation had been opened for fraud. But Sarah's revenge wouldn't end with Claire's destruction. There would be one last act, one no one expected. Because Sarah kept a final secret. Something about Claire's past that explained not only the fraud but the profound pathology of insecurity that drove her. And when the right moment came, Sarah would reveal that too. Not out of cruelty, but because the complete truth was the only thing that could prevent the next Claire Beaumont from emerging. 1 week after the scandal that shook the classical music world, Sarah received an unexpected message. It was from Claire Beaumont, asking for a private meeting. "Don't go," Ms. Rodriguez warned. "She might try to hurt you." But Sarah had her own reasons for accepting. Because there was one final piece of the puzzle she hadn't revealed publicly, something Vincent Chun had briefly mentioned but Sarah had deeply investigated in the preceding weeks. They met at a small cafe in Georgetown, away from the curious eyes of the musical elite. Claire looked like she had aged 10 years in 7 days. Deep dark circles, hands trembling as she held a coffee cup. "Why did you come?" Claire asked, her voice hoarse. "Because there's something I need to tell you," Sarah said. "Something that explains why you did what you did. And why, despite everything, there is still a path for you." Claire laughed bitterly. "A path? My career is over. I'm being sued for fraud. My name is synonymous with lies. What path could there be?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I discovered something about your past. Something Vincent mentioned but didn't fully understand." She paused. "You studied at Juilliard, right? From 1995 to 1999. Everyone knows that. But what they don't know is that you were expelled in your final year. Not for academic performance, but because another student accused you of musical plagiarism." Sarah tilted her head. "You submitted a composition in a contest that was almost identical to a Japanese colleague's work. And when she confronted you, You accused her of stealing your composition. Claire's face turned gray. How did you? School records are confidential, but the student in question, now a renowned professor in Tokyo, told me the whole story when I explained the situation. Sarah intertwined her fingers. She said you always had talent. Real talent. But you also had an obsessive need to be better than everyone around you. When you realized you weren't, you started cheating. You don't understand the pressure, Claire whispered. My father was a famous conductor. My mother, a principal violinist. Since I was born, they expected me to be a genius. And I was good, but not great. Never great enough. So you lied. First small lies, exaggerating about performances, inflating resumes. Then bigger lies. Sarah paused. But here's what I discovered that changed everything for me. Before hiring Vincent, you tried to hire 3 other pianists to do the same scheme. All refused. Not out of morality, but because you didn't offer enough money. Claire closed her eyes. I'm beyond redemption, Sarah. I know that. It's not about redemption, Sarah corrected. It's about the complete truth. And the truth is you are a product of a system that values the appearance of excellence over actual excellence. A system that punishes honesty about limitations and rewards well-executed fraud. That doesn't excuse me. No, Sarah agreed. But it explains. And the explanation matters because it's not just about you. It's about how many other Claires there are out there, lying because the system rewards the lie more than the truth. It was then that Sarah revealed the plan she had developed. I'm holding a press conference tomorrow. And I'm going to tell the complete story, not just your fraud, but the system that created it. I'm going to expose how the classical music world is structured to benefit the privileged while crushing genuine talent from marginalized communities. Claire looked up, surprised. Why? You've already destroyed me. Why continue? Because it's not about you, Sarah said simply. It never was. It's about changing the system so the next blind black girl doesn't need a scandal to get noticed. So the next desperate musician doesn't feel they need to sell their integrity to save their family. Sarah stood up to leave, but turned one last time. There's one thing you can do, Claire. In your public statement, and you will make a public statement, tell the whole truth. Not just about the fraud, but about the pressure that led you there. About how the system failed you too, even being white and privileged. Because if even you felt you couldn't be honest about limitations, imagine what it's like for people like me. 2 hours later, Claire Beaumont posted a 40-minute video confessing everything. Not just the fraud, but the whole story, family pressure, expulsion from Juilliard, a decade of escalating lies. And most importantly, she named names, critics who knew and ignored, foundation directors who benefited from the fraud, patrons who preferred appearance to authenticity. The video instantly went viral. But the reaction was different from what Claire expected. Yes, there was anger. But there was also recognition. Other musicians began sharing their own stories of impossible pressure, crushing expectations, and a system that punished vulnerability. The next morning, Sarah gave the promised press conference. But instead of just attacking Claire, she presented a comprehensive proposal, a scholarship program for musicians from disadvantaged communities, an independent audit of music competitions and awards, and mandatory transparency in arts foundations. Claire Beaumont committed fraud, Sarah told the cameras. But she is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is a system that tells musicians they must be perfect or be nothing. That values pedigree over talent. That closes doors to people like me before we even have a chance to play. Dr. Hayes, watching the broadcast, immediately grabbed his phone. Within the hour, the Boston Symphony announced the adoption of all the reforms Sarah had proposed. Other orchestras quickly followed suit. Jennifer Hartman, who had lost $500,000 in Claire's fraud, announced the creation of a $10 million foundation specifically for blind and disabled musicians. Sarah Mitchell taught me that investing in the appearance of excellence is a waste of money. Investing in real talent, no matter where it comes from, is the only thing that matters. Vincent Chun, at his own press conference, confirmed every detail and announced he would donate all the money he received from Claire to a child cancer treatment program. I saved my daughter by selling my soul. Now I will spend the rest of my life helping other parents not have to make the same choice. As for Claire, the prosecution offered a deal. In exchange for full cooperation in a broader investigation into fraud in the art world, she would avoid prison but would be banned from professional performance for 15 years. More importantly, she would be required to perform 1,000 hours of community service teaching music in public schools. "I want to accept," Claire told her lawyer. "Perhaps by teaching children who don't expect perfection from me, I can finally learn to play honestly." 3 weeks after the initial scandal, Sarah gave her first official public performance. Not in an elegant concert hall, but in a public school gymnasium in Southeast DC, for 500 students who had never seen a grand piano live. She played La Campanella, the piece she had originally promised to play at the Kennedy Center. But this time, there was no condescension, no test. There was only pure music, played for children who saw in her not a curiosity, but a possibility. When she finished, the silence was broken by an explosion of applause. And then, something unexpected. Claire Beaumont entered the gymnasium, carrying a chair. She sat in the back, tears streaming down, applauding louder than anyone. After the performance, a reporter asked Sarah, "How does it feel knowing you destroyed the career of one of the world's most famous pianists?" Sarah turned her blind head toward the voice. "I didn't destroy her career. I exposed the lie she built. And by doing so, I gave her a chance to start over, this time with honesty." She paused, a small smile crossing her face. Because in the end, it's not about destroying people. It's about destroying the systems that force people to choose between integrity and survival. 2 years after the scandal that shook the foundations of the classical music world, Sarah Mitchell, now 21, walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall in New York. Not as a tolerated spectator, but as the principal artist in a completely sold-out solo recital. In the front rows sat people whose lives had been transformed by that night at the Kennedy Center. Dr. Hayes, who had completely reformed the Boston Symphony's inclusion policies. Jennifer Hartman, whose foundation had already granted scholarships to 47 musicians from underserved communities. Vincent Chun, now a respected professor at a conservatory, teaching not only technique but musical ethics. And at the back of the room, wearing a discreet baseball cap, Claire Beaumont watched. She had completed 600 of the required 1,000 hours of community service, teaching piano in 3 public schools. Something strange had happened during those hours. She discovered that she loved teaching in a way she had never loved performing. Without the pressure of impossible perfection, without lies to maintain, she had finally found peace in music. Sarah positioned herself at the piano, her hands finding the keys with the familiarity of an old friend. "Before I begin," she told the audience, "I'd like to tell a brief story about what music truly means." The room fell silent, everyone leaning in to listen. 2 years ago, I was invited to play as a joke by someone who saw me as a curiosity. She thought she was humiliating me. But in reality, she gave me the most precious gift, a platform to tell the truth. Sarah paused. "Today, I play not as revenge against her, but as a celebration of what happens when we stop pretending and start being honest about who we are." She began to play, not La Campanella or Rachmaninoff, but her own composition. A piece she had written about the journey of the last 2 years, about loss and discovery, about injustice and redemption. The music flowed from the keys with brutal honesty. There was no artifice, no attempt to impress. There was only raw emotional truth that touched something deep within everyone present. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. But Sarah wasn't paying attention to the applause. She was thinking of all the children who would now have chances she almost didn't. After the performance, a journalist asked about Claire. "She is here today. Have you forgiven her?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Forgiveness is not forgetting what someone did. It's choosing not to let their actions define your life. Claire made a terrible mistake, but she was also a victim of a system that punished honesty. By exposing her, I exposed the system. And that changed everything. Claire, watching from afar, felt tears. Not of self-pity, but of strange gratitude. Sarah could have completely destroyed her. Instead, she had forced a confrontation with the truth that had, paradoxically, saved Claire's soul. In the following months, similar stories emerged from other corners of the music world. 3 other pianists confessed to using recordings in performances. 2 composers admitted plagiarism. But instead of total destruction, a path to redemption was offered: admit the truth, make restitution, rebuild with integrity. Vincent Chun published a book, Ghost Notes, Confessions of a Concert Pianist. It became a surprising bestseller, not for sensationalism, but for its brutal honesty about the pressures of the classical music world. The royalties went to Sarah's foundation for young musicians. Jennifer Hartman expanded her foundation, now focusing not only on scholarships but on musicians' mental health. Sarah taught us that talent without emotional support is a recipe for disaster. We need to care for whole people, not just their skills. Dr. Hayes presented reforms at an international orchestra conference. Within a year, 23 major orchestras adopted blind auditing policies for hiring, mentorship programs for marginalized musicians, and mandatory transparency in the award process. Sarah continued to perform, but she also became a fierce advocate for reform. At 22, she testified before Congress about the need for public funding for accessible arts. Her eloquence, combined with her powerful personal story, helped pass legislation that directed $500 million to music programs in public schools. Music should not be the privilege of the wealthy, she told legislators. It is a basic human right. And when we deny access based on zip code or skin color, we are not just harming individuals. We are depriving the world of geniuses who will never have a chance to be discovered. 3 years after the scandal, Claire completed her community service. But instead of returning to attempts at performance, she accepted a permanent position as a teacher in a public school in the Bronx. The pay was a fraction of what she used to earn, but the satisfaction was something money had never bought. "My students don't care that I used to be famous," she said in a rare interview. "They just want to learn music. And by teaching them without pretense, I am finally learning to love music again. Not for applause or recognition, but for what it always should have been, human connection through sound." One of her students, a 12-year-old boy from an immigrant family, won a full scholarship to Juilliard. At the ceremony, he thanked Ms. Claire, who taught me that mistakes don't define you. What defines you is what you do after you make them. Sarah, watching a video of the ceremony, smiled. The circle was complete. At 24, Sarah released her first album, Blind Faith. It was not just a showcase of technical skill, but a musical journey through themes of justice, redemption, and hope. Critics called it the most brutally honest emotional work in classical music this decade. The profits were divided equally among 3 causes: a child cancer treatment program, in honor of Vincent's daughter, the Foundation for Blind Musicians, and the scholarship program for the public schools where Claire taught. On the album launch night, Sarah gave a final interview about the scandal that started it all. "People ask me if I regret exposing Claire so publicly. And my answer is always the same: I don't regret exposing the truth. But I learned that truth without compassion is just cruelty disguised as justice." Claire paid for her mistakes. But she also had the courage to confront why she made those mistakes. And by doing so, she helped all of us understand that no one is just a villain or a hero. We are all humans trying to navigate systems that often set us up to fail. A reporter asked, "What advice would you give to young musicians facing discrimination or lack of opportunity?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I would say that talent alone is not enough. You need the courage to demand a seat at the table. And when you get that seat, use your voice not just for yourself, but for everyone still waiting outside. But I would also say, be honest about your limitations. The world doesn't need more manufactured geniuses. It needs real people making real art about real experiences. Because in the end, it's honesty that resonates, not perfection. If you believe that true talent deserves to be recognized regardless of origin, that broken systems need to be confronted with courage, and that redemption is possible for those willing to face their own truths, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because Sarah's story teaches us that the greatest revenge against injustice is not to destroy those who harm us, it is to build a world so just that their injustices become impossible to repeat. Claire Beaumont lost everything she had built on lies. Sarah Mitchell gained everything by refusing to accept a system built on dishonesty. But the deepest lesson was not in who won or lost. It was in understanding that real excellence comes from authenticity, not appearance. That systems demanding perfection create liars, not masters. And that sometimes, being knocked down is exactly what we need to finally learn to stand up with integrity. Sarah Mitchell didn't just expose a fraud. She started a revolution that redefined what it means to be truly great in any art. Not perfect performance, but honest humanity. Not impeccable technique, but genuine connection. Not appearing greater than you are, but being brave enough to be exactly who you are. And that, in the end, was the lesson that transformed not only the world of classical music but anyone willing to listen. The truth can hurt in the moment, but it is the only foundation worth building a legacy upon.